Welcome to the Open to Hope Show. I'm your host, Dr. Gloria Horsley, with my daughter and co-host,
Dr. Heidi Horsley.
Well, Heidi, we're going to talk about an important topic today for all those who have lost family members, because we're going to talk about handling money after death. And that's been really important for our family because 2.5 years ago, my husband passed away. And, I'm not getting younger. Like, I'm almost 84, and so I got to think about, how I'm going to set things up. So, because I know it's been a pain, it's been hard. So, Heidi, we've got a fabulous guest on today. Would you like to introduce her?
Sure. So we are going to be talking, like you said, Mom, about handling money after death. And our guest today is Gloria Sackler. Gloria is a financial advisor, and she leads Evergreen Lane Wealth Management Group. She is also the author of the book, The M Word, the money talk every family needs to have about wealth and their financial future. And I just started it. It's fabulous so far, Lori. Welcome to our show.
Thank you for having me. It's a real pleasure.
I was so excited, Lori, when I heard that we were going to have you on the show, because I said it's, my husband died 2.5 years ago. And wow, as any widow or widower knows, there's a lot. I mean, a lot of things to end and start and, deal with. It's pretty incredible.
No question about it. And I liken it to in a situation where the husband passes away. And I don't know your personal situation, but possibly he was the guy, the leader of the finances, the one who handled a lot, including maybe the business, but he may or may not have informed you of everything you need to know or prepare you. And I often say that women become chief financial officers at the most difficult time in their life.
Right.
Lost their partner for years and years. So it's very important for people to think through these issues with their partners before anything happens, so that everyone can be fully prepared and understand, etc.
I find that few people that I've talked to, widows, have done that. Now, for my husband and I had different businesses. I was a psychologist and I've been a clinical nurse specialist and taught at a university. But he always made sure that his firm, that I knew what was going on. And I traveled a lot with him, so I knew a lot about our money already.
Good.
He also was very much important to him to have a team. For me, he always said, Gloria, you need your team, you need a lawyer, you need your accountant, you need to have a team in place. If you tell people that you've had a loss, that people can be very generous about helping you. I've found that, but it's tough.
It's very, very hard, even when you've been prepared and you know the players and you know who to contact and what everybody's responsible for. Look, this is a traumatic experience when you lose a loved one. And I know your show is a lot about grief. And then you combine that with all the technical tools and skills that are necessary to really transport that estate into a place where it needs to go, and engage all the parties in a cohesive way, so that you can get to the result that you want to get to. So yeah, it's a very difficult process, but it sounds like in your situation, your husband did a lot of right things.
Yeah. He was, in fact, what happened was we interviewed a woman on our show who wrote a book because she helped her sister-in-law after the loss. And he took that book and went through it and made a book for me of all the things that would happen, and all the things, because he had been ill and had back surgeries. But I think even though sometimes we know that people are having an impending death, people still don't do anything to prepare.
If people sit down and want to talk to their children about things, it can be stressful because that means they're going to die. Do you know what I mean? So sometimes we don't even want to have those conversations.
Well, and I write about that in my books.
Yes, you do. Yeah. I was reading that part of your book, by the way.
Yeah, death is a scary subject, and it's hard to go there. And oftentimes I find even in my practice, when women or men are dealing with death and they're dealing with the estate transfer, the whole process becomes much more difficult because you've got all that loss and grief that you're handling. So so you have to really, the best time to do this is when people are healthy, they're alive, there's full disclosure of what's going on with professional advisors that are skillful and knowledgeable. And of course, part of my book is how to have these money talks and to talk to your children and start to convey to them some of the roles and responsibilities and how this will impact them. So it's a series of conversations that need to take place. And oftentimes the children are hesitant too, because they don't want mom or dad to die.
I think that's where we stand right now, because it's been 2.5 years since my husband died. And I am starting to think about some things. I have been thinking about going into a senior community, and I've got stuff. And, and some of it, my husband liked bronzes, and I have some nice bronzes and things. And what do I do? How do I begin getting rid of this stuff? Really, is what I've got so much stuff. How do you begin getting rid of it?
That's a good question, because a lot of people are collectors through their lives. And, we all are living very long lives, so we can collect a lot of stuff. But part of what I think needs to take place when you start to think about getting rid of things is to have a conversation with your kids, because I've seen that there's actually professionals out there that can also help sort out all your stuff and put it in categories and help you weed through what's valuable, what's not, what could go here, what could go there. But remember, your children have experienced a lot through the years with the things that you've collected, and maybe they have a special interest in some of these items. So, I find that personal property is one of the most antagonizing topics for families to go through after death. It's much easier if families have these conversations before, so everybody has an idea of who's going to get what in the personal property, because oftentimes wills just say personal property goes to X or Y, but there's not a delineation of some of those items. And there can be a lot of conflict in families when this happens.
What about the in-laws and stuff? I mean, that's another thing. I have 3 daughters. Should I just have them over and have them work with me on it? Then I have 10 grandchildren. I have 3 step-grandchildren. So I actually have 13 grandchildren. And I don't think I can leave them anything, only because maybe financially, if I could leave them all the same amount, is what I'm thinking. And I am thinking that that I don't want to leave him any personal items, because I don't think I could be fair. I really love each one of them. The grandchildren, talking about moving the inheritance, the stuff on to grandkids.
Everyone deals with this differently, treats it differently. Certainly you have to start with doing an inventory of things, right? And then, maybe the first thing you do is separate them out in terms of value. And then you have a conversation first with your children, because they're probably your number one priority in terms of the way that the assets will flow. And so maybe you start with one generation, and at the same time, you could say, well, maybe your daughter or son would like this piece. I mean, I think you have to be willing to, do the work, go through the inventory, identify pieces that your children or your grandchildren might like. And then there are various different ways that you can distribute them. You can distribute them obviously at death with a listing, which I highly recommend. You have a list of the assets, what's going to everybody, or you can gift it away during your lifetime. But the important thing is to get an inventory, have conversations, figure out who gets what, and try to avoid contention. Because what happens is, so I had a client who was promised a ring from her grandmother. Her mother had inherited it from her grandmother. Her mother also promised it to her. Her mother dies prematurely. Father and mother did not create a listing of the inventory, did not put it in writing who was to get what. So the husband, based on the will, all personal property goes to my surviving spouse. It's very typical language. He inherits this, and then what does he do? He doesn't distribute it the way mom and grandma wanted it distributed, right? He picks and chooses what he wants to do. And at the end of the day, it has created so much contention that actually affects multiple generations now, because there was a ring involved that was so special. And now another member of the family got it, and he gave it to his girlfriend. And so,
I was going to say, I know somebody who gave their diamond engagement ring to his second wife.
Right. So, but the point is, unless you, Gloria, or any of your listeners, unless you create a very specific listing. You can have it attached to the will and have those conversations before and figure out what's the best way to distribute it and who gets what. You will create a mess potentially. Mm-hmm. So I think if I could say anything, disclosure, conversations, and coming up with a final list that can be part of your approach for personal items.
How about houses and stuff like that? I mean, we know a situation recently where the daughter thought everybody said she could have the house and all that, but when they really die and people start thinking about the money, suddenly people don't think that they want to do it the way they thought they would.
Well, look, people can change their minds and they can change their wills too, right? But part of my mantra here is, carefully think through your estate. Not when people are sick, not when they're going into the hospital, not when there's a death in the family, and give yourself time and energy and surround yourself with skillful people who can help you and put it in writing. And maybe before you even put it in writing, you have conversations with the family members that will be impacted. And you maybe adjust, you take in their feedback. I mean, this is a process. It's right. Not, if you want to have the best outcome and you don't want, your daughter, Jane, or your son, John, to disown each other, right? Because they didn't get what they wanted. Yeah. And they didn't have a conversation about any inequities that might have been included in the estate. You are creating a nightmare for multiple generations to deal with. I see this in my practice, and that is part of the reason I wrote this book.
Another thing you said, Lori, in your book, which I felt was interesting, is that sometimes parents do not disclose how much they have. In fact, they hide it even when their children are adults because they're afraid their children will become unmotivated and lazy because they will expect something.
Yeah. So this is a problem, right? People who accumulate wealth, there's a lot of control around that wealth. They want to control the distribution. And there's also a lot of fear about what will the wealth do to the next generations, right? But there are certainly ways to deal with that. And you can certainly set up trusts. You can have distribution clauses in there, incentive clauses. But look, at the end of the day, I see a lot of wealthy families where the kids are very motivated. They work, they have passions. My idea is to raise financially responsible children from a very early age. They understand what money means. They understand how to manage it. They find their passion in life because ultimately they'll get reward out of that. The money's not going to give you ultimate reward. What you do in life, potentially with that money, is much more important than what you deliver in your own life. So raising financially responsible and, kids with values is probably the beginning step, because then you're going to be less worried about them abusing the privilege of the money that they inherit. Right? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. One of the things that I see as a widow is some women turning their money over to their children, their sons particularly, and children, and not having control over their own money. And I think that's concerning.
Well, look, it first of all depends on how much money, right? Adults who don't have a lot of money can start to draw down their money to take care of themselves. So that's not a particular issue. And so they might then decide, I'm going to gift these assets because they don't think they can manage them on their own, gift them to their children. But once again, it's a matter of trust, right? If you relinquish control, it has to be to someone that you trust, or children that you trust, or money in trust that helps to oversee it with good trustees. Look, to give up control is not easy for adults to do, right? I mean, and part of what I write in the book is that money is an object of control. People own this money and they control their families, and oftentimes they control them after they're in the grave.
But I see children sometimes controlling their parents, deciding what nursing home they can go to, or what they can do with this, or what you can do with that, because they're controlling the money. I just visited a friend down in Florida who was involved in a hurricane down there, and he's a real estate person. And he said, and they're very wealthy, it's a very wealthy area. He said he's never seen so many mean kids whose parents' areas have been destroyed and aren't willing to give them money to rebuild when it's their money. We encourage them not to rebuild, not to do this, not to do that. So I think there's another side also.
Well, of course, look, I always say, talk to your kids about money, but it depends on the maturity level of the kid, how responsible the kid is, and how the children will process it. Will they process it in a productive, responsible way? And you're right, there's a huge gamut of families out there. But Gloria, you have this amazing daughter working for you. You've got your whole family running this business. I think that just by my visual, that this is a family that has values, and they're working and they're collaborating. And so there's a much better feeling about maybe relinquishing control because you trust them. You have experience. They are, reasonably sound, children or adults, I should say. So look, it's so varied. And I say there's no one approach here. You need to understand who you're dealing with. We have situations where kids are have a special need, right? Yeah. So then, of course, you want to make sure that you have some type of special asset, a trust, a special needs trust, or insurance policy, or whatever it is. But, that's a situation where you obviously have to talk to the family about doing it a little bit differently when it comes to different family members. But my point is no single family is alike.
Well, one thing, don't die without a will. Please do not.
Oh, yeah, you don't want to do that. And that's something that
anybody.
Well, like you said, Gloria, this is very complicated because it's very subjective. And, if your kids have a history of being untrustworthy and taking advantage of you and trying to steal your money or something, then, you've got to be more concerned. If you trust your children and they've had a good history, then they're probably not going to change if they've got good values and a good head on their shoulders. But yeah, it's complicated. It's complicated. That's why I love your book, because families cut each other off permanently over these things. I've seen it over and over, as you know. Horrible stories.
And I personally experienced it with clients, but I will say that the most recent book that you have, the second edition, was written in response in the aftermath of COVID, and in response to the needs being even greater, because there's a heightened sense, and you probably, as PhDs, you probably get there's heightened anxiety, there's fears, there's a lot of social and economic upheaval. So what I try to communicate in my books is create a process, right? Spend time thinking through the approach that you're going to take, and include good professionals or a third party. It could be a financial advisor, it could be an accountant attorney, it could be a family friend that everybody trusts that has skills and knowledge. Because at the end of the day, when you start to talk about money with family members, things can break down pretty quickly. People go into their inner child, they can act out. So you're going to want to think about how you resolve conflict. But the whole point of this is not just with respect to death or loss, but it's in all the decisions that you make in your lives that impact, that involve money. You need to kind of think through who's going to be impacted by this. Who do I need to talk to? How do I think through the choices and make good decisions? And obviously communicate readily with the parties that be involved, and have a process that I can deliver repeatedly. Because talks just don't happen. It's not like you go in, you talk, and everything's resolved, right?
Right. Kumbaya.
Well, and one thing I want to say lastly about your book that I love is, for everybody out there, and I mean, I'm not a finance person, it's very readable, it's very user-friendly, and you can pick it up and just say, okay, I can skip around. Like, I looked at it and, it talks about retirement planning, remarriage, caring for elderly parents.
Oh my gosh, remarriage.
Raising responsible children, with allowances, etc. I mean, you can skip around to different chapters based on your own needs, which I love.
Heidi, that's very insightful of you, because I broke it down into what I call different transition points in life.
I like this. That makes sense.
So, it could be retirement, it could be marriage, remarriage, it could be caring for an elderly parent, selling a business, and of course, estate, transferring your estate. the real issue here is that any transition is at risk of being unsuccessful, and loss of money and family relationships if you don't have these conversations in a very productive way, and you really need to think about them in advance.
Do you have a website, or we just
I do have a website, themword.com, and you can you can click on different things and learn about what I'm doing and some of the interviews that I've been doing. Awesome. And there's definitely some endorsements that I think are really great. It'll help readers understand that this is a real book. This is not just this is part of the reason I wrote this new edition is 10 years ago, I introduced this concept, and it is definitely part of popular culture, and the media and financial services are taking a serious look at it, but nobody is, they're all sort of touching the surface. Yeah. As psychologists, you guys get it. This is complicated. Money is a very complicated element that's central to everything we do every day. So it's difficult to have these productive conversations.
Well, thank you so much for being on the show today. I'm excited. Yeah. We're going to be taking a little vacation together in July, and I think we're going to have your book there.
I love it.
Be talking about it.
We'll Good, Mom. That's awesome. We're going to have full disclosure. I love it. I'm ready. I'm ready, Lori. I appreciate this book, and I think it's the title is beautiful. The M Word. It says it all, basically, because it has been something that is so taboo for so many families to talk about, and they don't talk openly, and it's almost a secret. So I appreciate you writing this book for people.
Thank you.
And I will be reading it. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thanks everybody for joining us on the show today. And Heidi and I always want to remind you that if you've lost hope, please lean on ours until you find your own, and God bless.
I'm Dr. Heidi Horsley. You have been listening to Open to Hope, the podcast. You can follow Open to Hope on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. To learn more, visit us at opentohope.com and go to Apple Podcasts to subscribe.
I'm Dr. Gloria Horsley. Join us again next week for another Open to Hope conversation, where we invite you to lean on our hope until you find your own.